going on, Brooklyn Net fans? Hello, everyone, and welcome back into another edition of the Brooklyn Boys Show. Appreciate you all joining us right here on this Thursday, July 10th, 2025. Make sure you smash that like button and hit subscribe on your way into the building. It's completely free, and it really does help us grow significantly here on the show. Throw all your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat. We'll be reacting to those later, so make sure you load those up in the chat. But today we're joined by a very, very special guest. You all know him from Nets on SI and the new host of the Bleav Nets podcast, the great Jed Katz, graces us with his presence right here on the show. Jed, how you doing? Appreciate you spending some time.
I'm doing great. I appreciate you for having me on. I'm excited to talk Nets offseason.
No problem. I'm super happy you are able to be here. Obviously, you've done so many great things already in this industry, so I'm super happy that you're able to join us here on the program and share some insight on our Brooklyn Nets 1,000%. I know you're at the rookie press conference, and we're certainly gonna dive into the rookie draft class. And I think that's where we're gonna start today. I want to get into an article that you wrote for Nets on SI, where you kind of broke down the positives of this draft class. Obviously, a lot of fans now have had time to look back on it. The draft was over 2 weeks ago. It's been very gloom and gloom among the fan base, Jed. A lot of people are leaning more towards the negative category. You would also wrote an article on the negatives of the draft, but I think this fan base needs some optimism, despite all the pessimistic comments. Bill Simmons being one of them. We'll get to that later. What are some of the positives from this draft class that should get the fan base excited this coming season?
Well, first of all, I was shocked with the Nets picks. I did an episode of the podcast, the Bleav in Nets podcast, the day before the draft, and a lot of the players that I projected to go to Brooklyn did not end up there. They obviously took a lot of international talent. They took a lot of pass first, a lot of facilitators. So I think some of the the first positive that I would say is that this class has a lot of facilitation. There's a lot of passing. Just looking at like Yegor Demon, Nolan Traore, Danny Wolf, Ben Seraph, like these guys. Obviously there's a lot of concern about their shooting, there's concern about their scoring, but they can facilitate and they can really, push the pace. And I think, in this modern NBA, we're seeing that pace and space basketball is becoming the meta. Like look at the Eastern Conference champion, Indiana Pacers. They know how to push the pace. They didn't necessarily have this star scorer, but they had players who could really push the pace. They had guys that could shoot. And obviously, three-point shooting is a bit of a concern with this draft class. But I really like the facilitation here. I think Yegor Demon, he's a great floor general to have, especially at 6'9". And then you got guys who can really run the floor. So that's probably the biggest positive that I would say.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest negative, in my opinion, and is that an echo on your end, Jed, or mine? Because I know we spoke about that backstage, and I just want to make sure because I switched mics. I saw Luke come in the chat and say there was an echo. So Connor got a crazy echo. Is that me, Jed, or is that you?
I don't hear an echo on you. It might be on my end, honestly. I might have to put my headphones on.
Oh, it's fine. No problem. I mean, if it persists, maybe we can go that route. But I think it's I still hear it. So if you have headphones, maybe that would help fix it
absolutely.
a little bit. Yeah, sorry. Of course, you were the one who was ahead of the game, the Wisconsin student here, and I was like, no, it's fine. And turns out you were right. So yes, as Jed gets the echo fixed, I'll kind of just throw in my thoughts on this draft class overall. I like, and I think that's a lot better now. Yeah. I like select players in this draft class. Drake Powell is probably my favorite overall value selection in this draft class. We were talking about Powell a little bit off air. I actually bought his jersey, so he'll be the Nets jersey that I'm wearing this season. And I think he's a guy who could guard multiple positions for you, who could be a catch-and-shoot threat behind the arc. We were saying this backstage, like, I don't think he's going to be a superstar. I don't think he's going to be a guy who can be a number one or maybe even a number two option on a championship team. But I think he's going to be a very, very good role player who could be a third or fourth option for you on a winning team, who's going to be in the league for a very, very long time. So I'm very, very high on Drake Powell. Jed, how do you think he fits onto this team? I mean, you have a lot of small forwards on this team. Zaire Williams, you re-signed this offseason. You picked up Jalen Wilson's team option. Obviously, you have Powell. You have Terrence Mann, who could potentially be an option to be the number 3 for you this season. How does Drake Powell fit into the Nets rotation?
Well, I think that Drake Powell, like you said, he's not going to be this superstar player. We like Powell, but we don't view him as this star player, as anything of like this super crazy offensive threat. I would say he, for me, is most comparable, at least for what he could be in the league, is very comparable to like what Amen Thompson is for the Rockets. A Swiss Army knife in terms of what you can do on the floor. He can guard 1 through 5. He obviously has the frame and the athleticism to be a great defender in the league. And then also on the offensive side, maybe he's not a guy who could put the ball on the floor and score off the dribble, but he's a great catch and shoot. He's a great catch and shoot option. We saw it at North Carolina. He wasn't a prominent part of their offense when it came to putting the ball on the floor, but he was more of a catch and shoot player. He shot it from, I think it was around like a 38% clip at North Carolina. He's very much a 3-and-D guy who any team would love to have. And coming into the draft, I was very high on him. I thought he could have gone as early as the top 20, and the Nets ended up grabbing him at 22, which I think is great value, especially coming from a trade, the Porzingis trade, where the Nets didn't have to give up anything, and instead they end up receiving another first-round pick. So I love Powell as this Swiss Army knife, as somebody who could come in and really guard 1 through 5, be a point-of-attack defender. That's what I see in Powell.
Absolutely, and we're going to see all 5 of these rookies most likely play prominent minutes in the Summer League, and that kicks off tonight, the Nets' first Summer League matchup of the year against the Oklahoma City Thunder. For the Summer League games, we're typically going to have post-game coverage live on the channel, but I do have a conflict tonight, so the post-game recap on this channel will be live tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. EST, so stay tuned for that. But all the Summer League games, we should have immediate live post-game reactions. Jed, you've written a few articles for the Nets on SI site detailing some rookies to watch, non-rookies to watch. What should fans be honing in on tonight as the Nets face off against OKC in Nevada?
Well, I think aside from the 5 first-round picks, I would say another rookie, Grant Nelson, 6'10" forward out of Alabama. He's a guy who I thought should have been drafted, but instead the Nets pick him up for the Summer League roster. I love his game. He's very athletic. He's not the best shooter. He's not somebody who, he's not an incredible shooter, not an incredible offensive option, but he's very athletic. He's a great rebounder. We saw it the last 2 years at Alabama, and then, of course, before that at North Dakota State. He was unbelievable. He was a do-it-all superstar at North Dakota State, so I would watch out for him. And then in terms of the non-rookies, guys who have already been on this roster, Drew Timme, a guy who dominated the G League and then obviously came in and impressed towards the end of the season with the Nets. And then I would say Tosan Evbuoman. I'm terrible at pronouncing his name. Ewoma, yeah, okay. He's another guy who, again, played very well in the G League and came in and impressed. One of the first games that I got to see him play was against Utah when he had that 22-point performance. I think it was back in, I want to say January. He had a 22-point performance, had some clutch free throws to ice the game. That kind of showed me that he's ready for this challenge in the NBA, and I think in the Summer League, him and Timme are going to get a lot of great opportunities on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tosan Evbuoman, I'm not the biggest fan of Tosan. I don't like that they handed him a two-way contract right out of the gate. I'd prefer personally keeping a bunch of those two-way spots open. Like, giving Ewoma and Tyson Etienne both two-way deals was a little puzzling to me. I mean, the lingo among the Nets podcasters last season, I was not a Nets podcaster last season, but listening to a bunch of Nets podcasts, everyone was calling him Tucson from Walmart because no one had any idea where this guy came from. It's like he just, came up one game and he was playing 20 minutes a night for the Brooklyn Nets. That was just how inept this team was and how barren they were on talent last season. But, Ewoma is someone they gave a two-way deal, so he's going to have to embrace that mentality and hope to make an impact in the Summer League. Jed, let's move over to some of the offseason additions for the Brooklyn Nets. Let's start with Michael Porter Jr. You wrote an article about this, again, for Nets on SI. Check out Jed's great written work at netsonsi.com. For people who didn't catch this article from you, kind of summarize the piece. Michael Porter Jr., obviously 2 years left on his current contract. He has 2 pretty steep cap hits the next 2 years. Is Michael Porter Jr. a long-term piece in Brooklyn?
I don't think so. And I don't know if that's a surprise. I don't think that should be a surprise for Nets fans because the Nets are at least the moves that they had been making over the past year, they were extending their timeline, stacking up on draft picks. At one point going into the offseason, they were projected to have almost, $47 million in cap space. And obviously this Porter Jr. trade, paying an extra $17 million a year, it obviously hurts that. But I think this was more of a deal to, say, hey, let's move off of Cam Johnson. And in the piece I mentioned that the Nets should have moved off of Cam Johnson a while ago. They could have moved off of Johnson as early as the beginning of last season, and they waited. And they were, reports came out at the deadline that they were just merely fielding calls. They weren't actively shopping him. They were just saying, hey, what could we get for him? And I think that was setting them up for the offseason, because then they ended up not making that trade and going into the offseason. They're looking around the league, and this Porter Jr. trade comes up, and they had been working on it for a while. And I don't know how to feel about it right now. I would say that on the surface right now, it looks kind of like a win-win trade, but I wouldn't call Porter Jr. a long-term piece. I would say with him, he's 27 years old. He's making $38 million next season and then $40 million the year after that. I can't see the Nets giving him an extension. I could see him maybe playing next season in Brooklyn and then maybe at the deadline next year in his contract year, the Nets potentially moving off of him.
Someone who has strong feelings on the Cam Johnson, Michael Porter Jr. trade is Bill Simmons, and we'll get to Bill Simmons' comment right here on the Brooklyn Boys Show shortly, right after a quick break.
You are listening to the Brooklyn Boys Show with your host, Connor Long. If you're enjoying the show, drop us a sub and leave a like. It helps more Nets fans find us. Quick break, then back to talking Brooklyn Nets basketball.
It is the Brooklyn Boys Show right here on YouTube. Jed Katz, Connor Long with you. Thank you for sticking with us after that quick break. Make sure you smash that like button. And you do hit subscribe right here on the show. It's completely free, and it helps us grow significantly. Now, Jed, let's indulge into the comments that Bill Simmons made on his podcast that were quite polarizing. We'll start off to his overall thoughts on the Nets offseason, which wasn't all that pretty.
I continue to think they did an awful job, like really bad. I didn't like their draft. I don't like really any of that. I don't think they have like an awesome kick-ass asset. Their best asset is basically their own pick in 2026, which they traded to get back. But I just don't understand anything they did. They had all that cap space. I said this to Rob Mahoney on Wednesday. They were the guy in the fantasy draft that had $100 to spend with 10 and everybody else ran out of money. They were in the driver's seat in all these different ways. I just don't think they exploited it correctly. I don't like what they did.
Jed, I like Bill Simmons, but I think this take is absolutely asinine. I really do. I think the Nets had a great offseason. I think they kind of balanced, getting players who will fit their timeline down the road, guys with upside who can play make, who can help contribute to the future in Brooklyn. And he had some strong takes on the Michael Porter Jr. trade, which we'll get into shortly. But first, give us your reaction to Bill Simmons absolutely lambasting Sean Marks, the whole Brooklyn Nets, quote, awful offseason.
Well, before I give my take, I want to say that I also love Bill Simmons. I love listening to his stuff, him and Russillo. I love,
Hello, baby.
Yeah, love listening to them. But this take, I think, is very harsh. It's a harsh take because
You're about
the
to
Nets.
agree with them. My jaw almost dropped.
No, this is a harsh take, and I think the Nets going into the offseason, I don't know what expectation he had for the Nets this offseason. They weren't in any position to, maybe he wanted them to go after Giannis, with all those rumors going on. But I don't understand. What could you do if you're Brooklyn? Because you're setting yourself up for, a long-term rebuild. This is a rebuild that's going to take time. And I think
That's what Jim McMahon said on this very podcast. Like, he just thinks the Nets are going to take their time.
Yeah, absolutely. The Nets are going to take their time with this. And I think NBA fans and analysts such as Bill Simmons have grown impatient with rebuilds. I think, there's this idea that teams need to rebuild within like a 2 to 3 year window, whereas in reality, if you're a GM, like Sean Marks is probably looking at this like, okay, if we're going to do a long-term rebuild, this is going to be a 4 to 5 year window, perhaps even 6 year window where, we'll stockpile draft picks, we'll see slow improvement, we'll try to develop our players, and then we'll see what we can do in terms of making a big splash. But the Nets are setting themselves up for success with the amount of cap space that they have now and in the future, and especially, which, listen, I wasn't the biggest fan of Mark's when, right after they traded Durant and Kyrie, there was obviously a lot of questions. They were holding on to some of these guys like Bridges and Cam Johnson, sitting in mediocrity for a while. But I think he did right by Nets fans by finally picking a direction. And now the Nets, the Nets organization has a clear direction, and it's that long-term rebuild.
Absolutely. I want to get into what you said about Bill Simmons potentially, wanting the Nets to go all in on Giannis. Just to address that rumor for all the Nets fans who, for a hot second, wanted the Nets to go after Giannis, I think that might be the craziest take I've ever heard in Nets land. I think going after Giannis in 3 years, 2-3 years, when you maybe have your young core built and you're ready to contend and you just need a superstar to lead the way, then you trade for Giannis. But trading for Giannis right now on a team that has no shot of contending whatsoever, giving up all those assets, taking on his contract, wouldn't make any sense. It would make sense when you have your young core built, you're ready to contend, you have your role players, and then you just need that strong number one option to be the guy who ultimately brings you to the promised land. And I think that's when would be the right decision to trade for Giannis, not right now. So I think this take from Bill Simmons is absolutely crazy. I think the Nets did a great job, like you said, great point there, finding their own direction. And it was, in my opinion, a bit of a surprising direction, but they found their lane, and I think that's the way they're going to tread throughout this entire rebuild. So now let's move on to Bill Simmons' take about the Cam Johnson trade. That might be even worse than what he just said, calling the Nets offseason awful. Let's take a listen.
They're going to take an asset in the man contract, the Porter Jr. deal. I know it's an unprotected and 32 for that, but I was thinking about this. I'm like, wouldn't you have had to give up a pick just to get off of Porter Jr. at like $80 million the next 2 years?
This is going to be one of the things I brought up to you today. What if they had offered? No, what if they had offered Brooklyn? Here's Michael Porter. We'll give you our 2032 first. Just absorb him into the cap space. Like, do the Nets do that?
Well, clearly they would have done it because they gave him Cam Johnson.
But that's the thing was like, did they have to even put Cam Johnson in the trade? I thought I just think that trade, the more I thought about it over the last 5 days, I'm like, that's one of the worst trades of the decade.
I think that's a crazier take than calling the Nets offseason awful. One of the worst trades of the decade. I would have loved to be on that podcast, even just be the producer backstage and roll my eyes a little bit, because that's insane, in my opinion, Jed. I think Michael Porter Jr. is a way better basketball player than Cam Johnson is in multiple different facets. Plus, you had a pick that's going to be a prime asset. Nikola Jokic is going to be 37 years old the year of that selection. Kind of run down your thoughts there on Simmons' take, calling the Cam Johnson trade, and I quote, one of the worst of the decade.
It's asinine. It's ridiculous. One of the worst trades of the decade, and we haven't seen either of them take the floor for their new team. It's I'm seeing in the comments now somebody said Bill Simmons is rage baiting. I think he might be. This might be a take, for the views. I don't know, but listen, Cam Johnson is a fantastic player, and he proved that he could be one of the best role players in the league with the Nets the past 2 years. He got that opportunity as one of the top scoring options, and he took full advantage, shooting nearly 50% from the field and 40% from three, averaging 19 points just about. He's a fantastic role player, and he's going to make the Nuggets a lot better. I think he fits the Nuggets play style a lot more than Porter Jr. I think he's more prone to playing within a system, whereas Porter Jr. is very shoot first. Obviously, he's earned the reputation of not passing and being a score first player. But I think Porter Jr. now, and he said this, he last night put out a video talking about his situation and the whole trade. He said that his ceiling kind of plateaued in Denver. And frankly, I agree with that. As the third option, potentially even fourth in certain situations behind Aaron Gordon.
I think he was the fourth option, but on any other team, I think he would have been the third. I just think Aaron Gordon had such a big role on that championship team.
Right. So he talked about how his ceiling plateaued, and it did. And I think in Brooklyn now, coming in as the first scoring option, we're going to see a big jump in his production, particularly in the scoring department. And let's not forget that Porter Jr., although he has the reputation of being a shoot-first player, shot 50% from the field last year and 40% from three. He was incredibly efficient, despite what the critics say. And now, when we talk about defense, I think Cam Johnson's a much better defender. I think he's a smarter defender.
Oh, okay.
See, that's where we disagree on that.
You could argue on-ball defense is a little better, but I think MPJ's the better rebounder, 1,000%. I mean,
absolutely better. Yeah,
he averaged 7 points. He averaged 7 rebounds a game last season.
Absolutely, and that comes with being 6'10". Whereas Johnson is a 6'8". He's more of a perimeter defender than Porter Jr. I think Porter Jr. is probably a better interior defender, obviously a better rebounder, like you said, but I think Cam Johnson fits the Nuggets' identity a little more. I think he's going to have an easier time playing with Jokic just because he's a little more prone to passing the ball and getting teammates involved. So, in terms of the win, who won the trade scenario, I wouldn't label anybody as a winner just yet because we don't know where the Nuggets are going to end up in a stacked Western Conference. And by the way, a very overlooked part of this trade is that 2032 first-round pick. That is 7 years down the line from today.
That's going to be someone in my sister's grade right now, by the way. My sister's finally going into 6th grade. Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah, you traded. You just the Nets got a 6th grader in the Cam Johnson trade. But my point being, we don't know where the Nuggets are going to be in 7 years. Jokic might not even be on the team in 7 years. He's going to be, around 37, 38 years old?
Yeah.
We don't know where he's going to be. And we don't know where Jamal Murray's going to be. We don't even know where Cam Johnson's going to be 7 years down the line. And with that being said, the Nuggets might not even be a playoff team. And in 7 years, if the Nuggets aren't in the playoffs and they're a lottery team and the Nets own that pick, we're going to be looking back on this trade a lot differently. So I think for now, you can't label it as one of the worst trades of the decade, first of all. And then second of all, I think it's too soon to even judge the trade because we haven't seen either of these guys take the court. And I think on the surface, it makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, I think MPJ, you can't find me, I think, an aspect of basketball maybe than perimeter defense than Cam Johnson is better at than Michael Porter Jr. Plus, you add in that premium draft asset there. I think it's a clear win for Brooklyn. Let me just debunk this first. I've heard a lot of people in Nets Twitter. I've been on Nets Twitter a ton these past few days and listening to a bunch of Nets podcasts. I've been hearing a lot of people say that, MPJ can't stay healthy. Get back surgery early in his career. Let's keep that in mind. The past few years, there's no indication of any lingering issues. 2022, 2023, played 62 games. 2 years ago, he played 81 games. This past season, played 77 games. So do not worry about Michael Porter Jr.'s health. This was an issue that he suffered coming into the league. I mean, he didn't play his whole rookie season, but since then he hasn't showed any lingering signs of that back injury, of a knee injury that he suffered earlier on in his career. So do not be worried about, Michael Porter Jr.'s knee and back as a reason to be deterred and call this trade a bad deal. So that's what I wanted to throw in there regarding MPJ's health. Appreciate you all tuning in. Smash the like button, hit subscribe. Jed Katz, Connor Long with you guys right here on a Thursday edition of the Brooklyn Boys Show. Throw all your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat. We're going to start off with those, so load them up right in the chat. Throw everything there. Jed and I will be reacting to them. Jack Driscoll comes in, so I was hoping D'Angelo Russell would just stay in Brooklyn forever, so he wouldn't bother anyone relevant.
Listen, D'Angelo Russell is always going to be somewhat of a Brooklyn icon for what he did back in 2019, getting a team that was supposed to be towards the bottom of the barrel, getting them to the playoffs. I certainly appreciated what he did. He brought a sense of flair and youth to Brooklyn that then led into Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving obviously teaming up in Brooklyn, so he had to, he was obviously on his way out. But in terms of in terms of him staying, I don't know if that was ever really going to happen. I don't think that there was this expectation that he would stay in Brooklyn, even though a lot of fans were hoping for it. He was always going, at this point, he's an aging veteran. He was always going to end up on a different team, on a playoff contender, and I think he has the right home in Dallas. Obviously Kyrie's going to be out through most of the season, so they needed a point guard. So you get a guy like Russell, who at this point in his career is more of a role player and trying to fit in with a playoff contender. I think that's the right fit for him, and I don't think he would have ever found success if he had stayed in Brooklyn.
I'm a very, very new Nets fan, Jed. I have a very I don't even know if I shared this story with you off air. I typically do with a lot of the guests. We talk about Nets fandom, and that I know you grew up a Knicks fan, but it was super funny. So my dad doesn't follow basketball. I inherited all my dad's teams though: Mets, Jets, and Rangers. I'm not really much of a hockey fan, so kind of count the Rangers out of that equation there. But so Mets and Jets is my two primary teams. Jets haven't won more than 7 games in a decade. Haven't seen a Jet playoff game in my lifetime. Mets, on the other hand, pieced together a solid year last year, but a few years ago the Mets weren't all that great. They got off to a rough start last year too, before stringing some wins together down the stretch. But I was like, all right, I was getting into basketball as the super team was being formed, so I was like, I'm not winning a championship with the Mets or the Jets. I'm getting into basketball. So the Nets are from Brooklyn. I wouldn't be a total bandwagon. Brooklyn's in New York. I live on Long Island. So I'm like, this is my chance to win a championship as a fan. So I'm like, I'm becoming a Nets fan. And I think I might be the curse, because ever since then, been nothing but pain and misery. So I wasn't really a big fan to witness the D'Lo glory days in Brooklyn, but certainly hear all about how much of an impact he's had on this organization. I mean, the other long-lasting veteran you think of is Spencer Dinwiddie, but obviously that ended on awful terms. You heard him going on the Theo Pinson podcast and absolutely ripping the Nets last year for not trading him, for apparently effectively trying to end his career, saying, voicing out character concerns to a bunch of other GMs. So I always think of Russell and Dinwiddie as those two, kind of long-lasting Nets, because Nets are a very, very young team right now. I think the longest tenured Net is Nick Claxton. How long has Nick Claxton been with the Nets? Was that pre-bubble, post-bubble?
Might have been right around.
I think he was drafted in 21.
He might have been a rookie during that bubble year, or maybe 21.
Oh wow, he was drafted in 2019. Jeez.
Yeah, so he's been with that team for a while. So that bubble year was his rookie year.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I do not remember. Obviously, Nick Claxton's been on the team probably the longest out of anyone on this roster right now, but I didn't know it was that long. Let's see. Luce, is it Bill Simmons is talking shit? You did a good job. Yeah.
I mean, you're right. As much as I love listening to Bill Simmons, I think he has a lot of insightful takes, but I think when it comes, he's a bit of a Nets hater. I think he's kind of built that reputation over the last 10 years or so. When Bill Simmons is clowning on your organization, that there's a good chance that this ends up working out for you in the long run.
Let's see. Range Rove, who, by the way, Jed, is a Nuggets fan, longtime Nuggets fan of 20-plus years, I believe, who, since MPJ was traded, found this pod, and he's been since converted into a Brooklyn Nets fan. So there's another member now of the
welcome to the Nets family.
Nets fan base, and says a lot of people look dumb. Brooklyn probably making the playoffs.
Oof. I don't really know how to respond to that. The Nets making
higher than more people on this team. I don't think playoffs though. Like I think if they if they don't tank, I think they can be an 11 or 12 seed.
Yeah, well, so the East is obviously going to be significantly more weak than this past year, just with all the injuries, and then obviously it seems like half of the Eastern Conference is moving towards the lottery, and then the other half of the Eastern Conference is trying to win a championship. And so when you have such a polarizing conference, I think that creates a lot of leeway for like the middle spots. I think in reality the Nets could be that final play-in team if things go right this year, because I don't think there's any expectation that the Nets are in the postseason. But with this Eastern Conference and how weak it is, they could be right up there, trying to get that 10 spot. And we saw that earlier in the year. At one point in February and March, the Nets were, one maybe a half game out of the play-in spot at one point.
Yeah, the thing is that I will throw in there, though, Cam Johnson, you could say MPJ replaced him. The biggest point, Dennis Schroeder contributed to a lot of the wins earlier in the season. I don't know if the Nets have that veteran facilitator. And then obviously D'Angelo Russell down the stretch. I want to be as optimistic of a Nets fan as humanly possible. That's what I want to do, and I'm more optimistic than most of the fan base right now, saying I think they can be a 10 through 12 seed this season. And I think the main other thing last year is they had a deeper bench, in my opinion. I think they had more guys they can come in and trust to give you 20 minutes a night. His
Yeah.
team's very, very young this year. I don't know how many reliable options off the bench there are. I mean, I'm going to throw a heater at you here. If you had to predict the Nets starting 5 this season,
Oof.
who would you go? I
Um,
I'd go Yegor, CT, assuming that he's back on the roster. I go Yegor, CT. The 3 is where it gets interesting. I'd go Zaire at the 3, MPJ at the 4, Claxton at the 5, and then or I would do MPJ at the 3, Clowney at the 4, Claxton at the 5. One of those combinations. I want to see Day'Ron Sharpe. That's why I just wanted to trade Claxton. Trade Claxton, get as much value as he can for him right now, and put Day'Ron Sharpe, the guy who's one of the most efficient rebounders in all of basketball, in there to get run with the starting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you on moving Claxton. I think he would bring back an insane amount of value if the Nets were to send him to a team that needs a center. I know back at the deadline, the Lakers were really eyeing Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe, but obviously they're both still on the roster. My starting 5, I'm right there with you. Yegor at the 1. And then hopefully, if he's back, Cam Thomas at the 2. I don't know where that's gonna go, but it looks like there's no market for him. So I would assume that he's going to be back on the roster. So I go Yegor, Cam, and I'm gonna throw a bit of a hot take at you here. I'm gonna go Michael Porter Jr. at the 3.
I could see that, definitely.
That's fair, yeah. But this past season we saw a lot of success with those double big lineups.
Yeah.
Specifically with the Houston Rockets, another team that I've been covering. They threw out Alperen Şengün and Steven Adams as a double big lineup, and they were incredibly efficient together. They had like a plus 39 rating when they were on the floor together. Why not give, Danny Wolf a look at the 4?
Ooh.
And I'm going to explain why. He played the 4. Now, a lot of people don't know. He played the 4 at Michigan. Vlad Golden was his 5 at Michigan. They worked a great 1-2 game, especially in the low pick and roll. Wolf obviously built a reputation as a great facilitator. I wouldn't be surprised if for a couple of games, Jordy gets a little experimental and starts throwing this double big lineup of Danny Wolf and Nick Claxton, especially because Claxton, I think, complements Wolf so well, because Wolf is a guy who plays a lot on the perimeter. And for a guy like Claxton, who's very much like a rim runner, his range isn't really extended. I appreciate it. I think I'm cooking here. But, Claxton is very much a defensive anchor. I think he would take a lot of those defensive responsibilities off of Wolf if Wolf were to play the 4. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jordy gets a little experimental, especially with, the amount of time that the Nets have to develop these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want Danny Wolf to get starting reps, whether it's in Brooklyn or Long Island. I want these rookies to be playing, and I think the way the Nets have kind of utilized Long Island over the past few years has been very, very wonderful, in the sense that they're getting rookies run who maybe are the 10th, coming off the bench as maybe a reserve in Brooklyn, but they're starting and giving you 20 points a night on Long Island. I think you need to get these rookies playing, because you can't put them all on the court together. That's another downside of this draft class. You can't play them all together just due to the positional value. So I think you want these rookies playing as much as possible, whether it's in Brooklyn, whether it's in Long Island. I think a Danny Wolf, Day'Ron Sharpe 4-5 can look really, really solid, just because you get the defensive versatility, and Sharpe, who can guard multiple positions. I just think Nick Claxton has lost his defensive prowess. Like I just don't think Nick Claxton's that great of a defender. So if you can get Day'Ron Sharpe in there as your 5, who can defend multiple positions for you, who can rebound, and then Danny Wolf, who could be your shooter. He could hit the 3 ball. Like, I think there are a lot of similarities between Noah Clowney and Danny Wolf. I think Danny Wolf is a little more lengthy and a little more athletic than Noah Clowney is, but I think there's a lot of similarities in their kind of shooting game. Where do you think Noah Clowney fits in this year, not having him in your starting lineup? And where is he a bench option? How does he fit in?
I mean, I would see him more as a bench option, but I would see him more at the power forward than the center. I think he is more of a stretch 4, a guy who can, space out and hit the 3 ball. I think that's one of the bigger things that I think he could thrive in, is being a 4. And I can't see him really working his way into the starting 5 just because of the amount of youth that this team has. I think that there are guys that the Nets might prioritize over Noah Clowney. But again, Sean Marks said during the press conference that he expects most of these guys to spend some time in Long Island. He doesn't. I don't think we should expect to see all of these guys playing the entire season in Brooklyn. Maybe Yegor spends the entire season in Brooklyn, if that. But I mean, this is going to be a huge developmental year for the Nets, and that should come with almost all of these. If I were Marks, and we can play GM and coach all we want, but I would have these guys spending a lot of time in Long Island and developing their game. And we saw that with a lot of the rookies from last year. Obviously last year's draft class wasn't highly regarded, but we saw a lot of those rookies, even some lottery picks, spending a lot of time in Long Island, or not Long Island, in the G League.
Yep.
And this year, I think the Nets should do more of the same and send a lot of these guys down into the G League and develop those guys.
Yeah, Range Rove, I like Brooklyn roster more than gassed up Orlando and people rating the Magic going into the season. The thing with the Nets is this roster has a lot of upside. It really, really does. But it's only hype until it becomes fruition. That's the bottom line. I've been a Jet fan my whole life. I've covered the Jets for almost 2 years now. I know all about upside and false hope. So I think it's all upside right now until it really turns into fruition. I mean, can this team be a 10 or 11 seed? I still hold out hope that can be the case, but I think you need to get off to a strong start to the year, and I think you need to string together a few wins down the stretch. The Nets could have easily been a playoff team last year, but they got off to a very, very hot start. They were 10-8 or whatever it was, first 18, 20 games into the year, and then they slowly died down towards the end of the year. They weren't able to string together wins. I think it's a contingent of now at this point getting off to a hot start to the season and then stringing together wins on the back half of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year was more or less what I expected. If this team did get off to a hot start, which they did, they would eventually die down. I think we've seen that a lot in the NBA, where maybe some lower level teams, teams toward the basement of the league, maybe get off to around a 500 start. People start to think, maybe they could make a little bit of a run here, but eventually, and just looking at the personnel with this Nets roster the past year, I don't think there was any real expectation that they would be in the playoffs. I think eventually they fizzled out as they should have, and even towards the end of the season they were hovering around the play-in tournament. It was a very slim chance that they were actually going to play to their full potential, just because the Cam Thomas injury obviously affected you. He only played a quarter of the season and sat the rest of the year. So I don't know if there was any real expectation for this team to do any damage in the East. But going into this year, like you said, this team has a lot of upside. I don't know if they'll tap into that upside just yet, because this is year one of this historic draft class. But we'll see what happens. I'm very optimistic about this team.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think the biggest thing that people are overlooking now at this point, kind of because it's just people are taking it for granted now, is that I think the Nets have found their long-term coach in Jordy Fernandez. I think that's the hope. I know a lot of fans like Jordy, but I don't think people are acknowledging how important that really is in a rebuild. Again, another Jets comparison here. You go through multiple different coaches. You have Adam Gase, for example, from the Jets' perspective, for 2 years. He wins you 4 games over 2 seasons down the drain. You bring in Robert Saleh, you think can be your long-term option as the head coach, wins 7 games 2 years in a row, and then wins 5 games with a fully healthy Aaron Rodgers and gets fired midway through the season. So I think the biggest thing is finding your long-term coach, and I think the Nets have that in Jordy Fernandez. And I don't think the fan base is really honing in on how important that is to have your coach who can develop your young core, who can, build a rapport with your locker room, build a rapport with your GM. I don't know if they have their long-term GM, though. Maybe in the Nets eyes, but I don't think Sean Marks. What are your thoughts on Sean Marks? I want to get your thoughts on Marks, because I know a lot of the fan base doesn't like him. I don't like Sean Marks at all. I think Sean Marks, I say he's the cat who has 9 lives. I mean, this guy, the only thing that he can really do is draft. I know he's strung together some trades, but I like who he is as a drafter. And the guy drafted with the 29th overall pick in the NBA draft a few years ago, remains on the restricted free agent market, and he refuses to pay the guy after he pans out. It's just a lot of puzzling decisions, in my opinion, that come from Sean Marks. How would you kind of rate his tenure in Brooklyn, and do you think he's on the hot seat?
Well, I would put him in the hot seat, but I think at first, I first started covering the Nets around 2022, 2023.
Right when I started them.
Yeah. And I think, after they traded Durant and Kyrie, they were kind of sitting in this state of mediocrity. They were sitting in NBA purgatory because they didn't have, their draft picks at the time, and they had some solid guys like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson that were winning enough games but not losing enough games. And for a while, I wasn't high on him at all. But I think with what he's been able to do over the last year or so, acquiring these draft picks, setting the Nets up in terms of the salary cap and cap space, and in the future. Listen, I don't know if the Nets aren't going to can Sean Marks right now. Like if Net fans are wanting Sean Marks to go, they're going to be disappointed because he's not going any. At least right now. Mm-hmm. And I say that because he's done what he needs to do to set them up for success. Now, they're not successful yet. They obviously have a ways to go, but he's laying the foundation with these draft picks and the salary cap space to where, you might need to let him cook a little more here. Let's give him, let's wait a couple of years. Let's wait like 2 or 3 years, see where the Nets are at, and then I would, determine whether you want to keep him or can him. But I love Jordy Fernandez. I think he was absolutely the right coach that they needed to bring in. He's a very developmental coach. When he came in here during his, he got interviewed by Yes Network, I remember, and one of the things that he was preaching is selflessness and being able to push the pace and being able to, stray away from this, me first, score first mentality and buy into that, team first mentality, which, years down the line reflects what the Indiana Pacers have done over the last year and how they got to the finals. Yeah. And I think the Nets now, especially with this draft class, like it fits that motto of like, hey, we're going to push the pace, we're going to facilitate, we're going to run the floor, and we're going to play to our strengths. And I think that's what Jordy Fernandez is going to do with this young group.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you all tuning in. Smash the like button, hit subscribe. Jed and Connor right here with you on a Thursday edition of the Brooklyn Boys Show. Appreciate you all tuning in. As always, another show in the books right here on the Brooklyn Boys Show. Back tomorrow, 9 a.m. EST, recapping the Nets Thunder Summer League game tonight. Tip off at 5:30 p.m. EST, so certainly stay tuned for that. Jed, can't thank you enough for hopping on. You got any final thoughts you want to share with everyone here before we let you go? And then let everyone know where they can find you on socials and all your incredible work.
Yeah, well, my Twitter is Jed Katz NBA. I check out my articles on Nets on Sports Illustrated, as well as the Bleav in Nets podcast on the Bleav Network. Just put out an episode yesterday talking about the Michael Porter Jr. trade, as well as a bit of a summer league preview. So yeah, just check me out on those platforms. Connor, I appreciate you for having me on. This was awesome. Love talking Nets off season as always.
Absolutely. We definitely have to do this again soon. This is super, super fun. So appreciate you sparing some time. Appreciate you joining us right here on the show. Everyone, appreciate you watching. He's Jed Katz. I'm Connor Long. Have a great day, everyone. And as always, go Nets.